Hey everybody. We'll give a couple minutes real quick.
Hi everyone.
All right, great. So we'll go ahead and just kind of kick off and start with some of you guys are, I think, might be here for the full hour, but we're gonna go through the different breakout groups, and we're gonna start with the first one. So just kind of starting from that point, we'll have. All right, well, Sarah's moving to later, but we can start with Thomas W.
Yep.
Hey Thomas, how's it going?
Good. How are you?
Good. Um, cool. So kind of let's go through what you had planned for last week, which I know we didn't catch you in person last week, but build simple workflow for new customer, 12 steps. So let's kind of discuss what happened and yeah, where you got stuck.
Yeah. I probably got 30% of the way through. I got three of the steps done. I ran into some technical challenges, and I am only semi-technical. Um, and yeah, that's kind of where I got stuck. And then it took a lot longer than what I was expecting. So I spent a few hours, and I'm gonna have to not restart, but like get back into it this week from where I left off.
Okay. So let me go ahead and share my screen just so we're all on the same page here.
While
So
you're doing that, which platform are you using real quick?
So it's a bit of a we're using N8N for the this flow that I'm doing. Kind of have a few different things we do in the background because I what I was basically testing was different text extraction models. So like Amazon's TextRact, and there's like a bunch
Mm.
of other people that offer versions of it, and trying to see which one gives us kind of the highest quality for part of our onboarding.
okay. So when you say you hit a roadblock, a technical roadblock, what was that specifically?
So technical roadblock was the three that I had initially started out with, which was TextRact, Mindy, and then another uh, Llama Cloud was the third one that all did the text extraction.
Okay.
Um, Basically, just implementing their API using N8N was where I ran into a wall. So I'm like I said, I'm only semi-technical. So when I had to get into the custom API polls, that was when I hit a wall. So it's just, I think I can solve it. It just is going to take me a lot longer than I thought it was.
How are you planning on solving it?
Just more, I'm gonna have to test things. That's basically the initial way that I had done it. The initial kind of flow didn't work, and so I'm gonna have to try a few different flows to see which is actually gonna get it working, basically.
Okay. Got it. All right. Um, have you looked through different tutorials also in trying to help you set these things up?
Yes, yeah, that was kind of what I got to, and it just was so like the flow that they have, like Llama Cloud is was crushed Mindy and Textract in terms of quality, but when they have their API set up, it's obvious they have like an N8N node that's custom, and then they have their documentation around just APIs, but they don't really like their walkthrough is if you're doing it in Python, like in a system not using N8N. So I basically just have to merge their walkthrough and an N8N walkthrough to get to where I'm trying to get to.
Okay. All right. So I'm trying to just look at it from my perspective, right? Because I'm not super technical either, and I've built things out through these different workflows. I haven't used N8N because it is more technical, and that's become more of like a favorite for my co-founder CTO. But I've used things like Zapier or Make, right? And so um, yeah, I think like some of the hurdles tends to be spending the time to figure out how to unblock yourself. So, like getting the whole workflow to work, I feel like would still be somewhat aggressive just thinking about it from my perspective versus like, making sure that the APIs are connected and you have all the different nodes set up correctly
Right.
versus, like because when I imagine like complete the workflow, it means that you've tested it, it's working, it's functional, which I feel like takes in of itself is like almost like a week of experimenting with it to get it to work the way that you need it to work because there
Yep.
are all these different variables within each of those nodes that you have to set almost like, I mean, like bespoke configuration for it to do this,
Yep.
the thing that you want. So to me, a more obtainable goal will be just like making sure you have the APIs for the tech stack and then the APIs working for each node that you need to at least theoretically get it to work.
Yep. I think that's fair.
Huh. Okay, cool. So that's what I would set up for this next week. So by Monday of next week, like if I asked you to walk through it, you could show us okay, this is the workflow,
Yeah.
and then these are I have it all plugged in. It's not working as the full way that I need it to work yet, but then we could set like week three's goals doing that.
Yep. Got it.
Yep. Cool. Takeshi,
Yep, I'm here.
cool. So we were last create a list of jewelry and watch store owners, and so give us update where you are there.
Yeah, so instead of using Phantom Buster, I just hired someone to write a script to
Okay.
just scrape the Google Maps and the website to get the email. I couldn't get the email with the Phantom Buster. The Google Maps for some reason doesn't have email, so I had to figure out another way. But I did scrape all the Texas jeweler,
Okay.
and then I'm gonna scrape the rest like California, New York, Florida, four biggest states.
Got it. So you're
Yeah.
able to get everything but emails so far.
No, I couldn't get emails on the Phantom Buster. I tried it,
Okay.
but couldn't get it. So I had to um hire someone to make a custom
But
script.
but you got that done.
Yeah, correct. I have. Yeah, I
Texas.
got that done.
Okay. So you got it done for Texas, and then you're looking to build out what next?
California, Florida, New York.
Okay. Good job. So you able to get that done. Now, what are you proposing? So next week you're looking to find a way to get contact owners and get finding a way to,
Yeah. I need to get beta testers to run my app.
yeah, so
So,
you
yeah,
mean contact owners, not get contacts, right?
yeah, contact owners. Yeah, correct. I think last week you said there's a way to get the owner's contact,
Yeah.
but yeah, but
Okay.
I need to get the owner's contact and
Yeah,
then
yeah. So to me,
somehow email them. Yeah,
yeah, yeah. So this week, again, if you're able to get contact data now, what data do you have?
I have phone numbers, emails
Okay.
from the website. So I have those two that I can use.
Phone numbers, emails.
Yeah,
Yeah. Okay, so that gives you cold call, potentially SMS, voicemail, email, right?
yep,
Um, as these are the channels that you have, so you don't need to find a way. These are the ways, right?
okay,
So you have these are the channels that you ultimately have to contact donors. So to me, this week it would be setting like it's not get so next week would be get 5 beta testers. But I would say this week is like what do you have to do to get one person to talk to you? Like in not like a beta, like the step before a beta tester, but like how do you get somebody to essentially like demo them or get them into a discovery call to make sure that they would be a good fit as a beta user? Does that
Okay. Yeah,
so
yeah.
so basically my ask would be how do you get to one meeting with a target customer or a target,
Hmm.
okay? And in that exercise, it's going to force you to qualify because you're going to maybe have a few conversations, but it may not be with your target beta user. So it's going to force you to understand what the qualifications are for a good beta user. And then
Hmm.
subsequently, we can reverse engineer. If you can get to one, we're going to look at the different steps that you use to get to the one. And then seeing if you focus on just doing those exact same steps again, but now using a multiple against that, if you can yield five, if you do five times the more effort, right? But right now, you don't know if it's going to be cold calls. You don't know if it's going to be SMS. What I'm basically saying is you're going to put yourself into a corner to use all of these. So you can't just rely on email, right? So if you send a bunch of
Yep.
emails, maybe it will work. Maybe it gets you no responses. And if it gets you no responses, it's going to force you to do something different, right? So it's going to force you to pick up the phone, force you to do a cold call. Maybe that's the thing that gets you the responses, or alternate, right? So maybe it's going to force you. You're going to do the cold calls first. You get nowhere, start sending emails, and that gets you somewhere. Again, I don't know what that's going to be. You don't know what that's going to be. But the goal is to do whatever it takes to get to the one meeting, and then we can look at the things that you actually did that got you there.
Okay. Got it.
Does that make sense?
Yep.
Okay, so it's gonna, yeah, you're doing the ad hoc means to get to one meeting. Then we'll reverse engineer to actually look at what worked to get to that one meeting, and then attach a multiple to that.
Okay.
Um, Rylan and Pablo are out. Nick,
That's me. How's it going, Chris?
good. How are you?
Doing well, doing well.
All right, so Nick, you are let's see, evaluation of pain points for a specific ICP, framing of the leading questions. All right, so were you able to complete this?
Yes, yeah.
All right.
So I went through what I thought the pain points were. I did some kind of like what we had talked about before, synthetic interviews to kind of see if I was on the right track. I also had a couple interviews that were previously scheduled, so
Yeah,
I went ahead and kind of used those as a way to try and
yeah,
start doing some of these leading questions to see if I was getting the responses I was expecting.
yep.
Um, and then yeah, now I made like a table with like, okay, here are, I think the six pain points and leading questions and what I would expect the answers to be.
Okay, cool. And so let's see, your next is to create a clickable demo to use in ICP interviews. All right. So what do you mean by clickable demo?
So I want right now I don't have any kind of demo video or anything like that. It's like me walking through a slide deck. And as I'm doing some of these interviews to understand how I actually fit into some of these companies' current processes. I kind of want to take that step back to show them, hey, here's how trial run works and get their kind of feedback on how does this fit within what we currently do as
All
I'm
right.
doing some of these ICP interviews.
And how are you expecting to create the clickable demo?
So I was doing some research today. I found something called Arcade, that has it's like where I want to use what I've built in Lovable and then use Arcade to like kind of parse it out. Arcade is yeah.
Okay.
It's not exactly like a full-on demo where I can go in and play with everything, but it's more of a lead demo. If that makes sense.
Yeah, so then are you gonna expect to j- run through this live in a conversation, or are you expecting to send this as a link for somebody to review on their own?
So use the first 15 minutes as like an interview and then send the link for the last 15 minutes and have them share screen and talk me through it as they're clicking through, is what I was thinking. Kind of like the bullseye customer, Mike
Okay.
Margolis kind of thing.
Okay. And the goal for that would be to see.
I want to validate like that this is my ICP and that what I've currently, the way we're trying to approach things actually fits into the ways they work. Because
Okay, so
right now
basically
my
to
thought
test
is that there's a bit of a mismatch there.
I understand. So to test if the if the UI and UX matches the way that the user would engage with the product as it aligns to the proposed value of what you're providing.
Exactly.
All right. So all right, that's cool. I think that's good. So just creating the clickable demo is the goal.
Yes.
Not even
Yeah,
getting the interviews yet. So the following week we can do focusing on getting the interviews.
exactly.
Cool. Liz W. She on yet? Okay, we can come back. Um, Lisa V. Yep.
Hi, how are
Lisa.
you?
Good.
This is my first meeting. I couldn't make the first one.
Sure.
So do I give an overview of my business or do you want me to just dive into goals?
No, just dive into goals. And so we'll leave the week one as empty for now. So like I'm because there's no way for us to really know retroactively what that was originally nor how it was broken out. But let's say for week two, this week between now and next Monday, what are you looking to accomplish and why?
Sure. I did fill out week one and I feel like we did all of the stuff for week one, but I'll just go over week two. So my business is basically AI driven content. You can think of it as choose your own adventure Netflix, if that's easiest. So a couple of things that are in on process. I engaged with an AI lawyer. We need to understand the content generation process so that we know what things to avoid or not avoid with our workflows, our automated workflows, so that we know what can or can't be copyrighted long term. So that is a call that needs to occur. That's the number one. Number two, we have three different workflows in flight. Number two was finished last week. We're working on finishing number three by Tuesday this week. The third bullet point is we're trying to finish our MVP content so then we can test in a closed beta all of our like feature sets that we want to test. So we're pushing to finish that content within the next 2 weeks. I'm working on hiring someone to help us think about the full infrastructure and workflow as well. We have a final interview with them today. And then number four is hiring on our editing and our sound person. So those are the things for this week.
Got it. So I want to just for the since you weren't here last week, I think what I'll do is provide some context for how we should structure these, right? So on these on the accountability group, like for your business, there's going to be like, dozens of other tasks that you need to do on a day-to-day basis. Everybody here is going to have dozens of tasks. What I want you to do is pinpoint a single goal that's almost like a stretch goal between now and Monday that you need help to either break down or be held accountable to make sure that and that how that whatever that goal is or whatever you're choosing is going to have as much of an immediate impact on driving new customers or new revenue or separately driving for potential fundraise. So these seem to be a lot of like logistics parts of the business or the mechanics of the business. But between now and Monday, for example, like what would be something that you need to have done with the product or that you have done with the product that you can start engaging with your market or start talking to a customer with?
I guess I'm not clear how they're separate, and maybe that's, like a separate conversation I could have with you, or, we can have it now if that's helpful. But as an example, logistics with like understanding how the law impacts your AI workflow is not, you need to know that before you build something that then won't work in the market, right? So they're all interconnected in my mind. I'm not quite sure what you mean, I guess.
Yeah, so I mean so for me these are all part of the product for the most part.
Uh-huh. Yes, they
And
are all part of the product. Yeah.
okay. So if it's all part of the product, right? Like you're building a product for who? Who's your audience?
Yeah, so it's a double-sided marketplace. We have creators on one side and we have viewers on the other side. Again, you can think of Netflix if that's easier to understand. It's our own created when we create our own content, but then we also have other people putting their content on our platform as well.
Okay. And right now, how many creators do you have?
Yeah, so we're starting with our own content. So we're explaining to people how to use the platform with our own content, and then the creators are able to build out upon our own content.
So how many
But
creators do you
I've
have right
reached
now?
out to about 25. So 25 are interested and would like to start to work on what we have.
Okay. Okay, so to that point, right, if you have 25,
Mhm.
um, how are you monetizing from them?
That's not the business model. We're not monetizing our creators. We're planning on building out the content component, and then right now the plan is to monetize viewers. So creators are not the monetization component.
But you need to get them first.
Yeah.
Okay. Um, so to me, I guess like the question would be all of this you need to get done so that you can get the creators onboarded. Is that correct?
Yeah, I mean, again, there's a lot of differing components of the business. So yeah, we need to get the creators on board on the platform. We need to build out the workflows that they can use. So that's what a lot of these bullet points are. And then we also need to ensure that our content is in a really good spot so they can use that content to build on it. So does that make sense?
Yeah,
Is
I
that
guess my question is like how are you validating what you're building as it relates to how they would use it?
Yeah, so we've done interviews, one-to-one interviews. The plan is to build out, this is why we're pushing to build out our MVP content number three. We're trying to build out our MVP of content so that then we can run it through audiences. So we've already spoken to, I think, 25 people and validated that they're interested in this type of platform, but we want to actually have a content piece where they can choose their own adventure within that content, those branching content that we've created, and
Okay.
then we can start to test all of those features. So that's why number three is finishing all the MVP content and then testing it. That would be the next step after number three is done.
Okay, so then I think we've highlighted what should be the goal. So the goal would be finished. Between now and next Monday, can you finish all MVP content?
No, no, we can't finish all of that. But I mean, we can get a good chunk of it done. That's the plan. We have a structured plan, a day by day schedule to execute probably about 75% by next week.
So between now, so to me the goal would be can you get 75%? And then 75% because I'm not going to know what that means. Like, can you add into here what 75% means, right? So like break down like we will have you don't have to list every single content piece done, but like what is the what is the milestone that indicates you're 75% of the way there?
Yeah, it would be by scene. So we would be like done with like let's say scene eight of as an example, scene eight out of 12. So just so that I understand, are you saying that you're only focused on the goal that it will drive revenue? Like in your mind, what needs to happen to drive revenue? Even the other components of the business, you're not thinking about those in this call. Is that what you're saying?
Correct. Yeah. So things that are actually going to drive the and if you think about revenue too, like it could be 3 months away from now that that's going to be realized.
Hmm.
But what's going to be what needs to happen today to get you to that so you hit it in 3 months and it's not 6 months? What ends up happening a lot of times is like I'll see companies that are so, especially two-sided marketplaces, where it's like you become so ingrained in the product and or trying to service both sides of the marketplace without getting full like density with one side or the other, and you're not able to fully get to that place where you have an ecosystem that's working, or it takes much longer than than it than it has to be because you're not prioritizing necessarily the things that are going to move the needle on getting some niche of that overall market to work sustainably in the short run, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it does. And I understand what you're saying. I mean, I guess my other question for you then would be like, if you're prioritizing revenue, we have revenue opportunities right now. Like, we could execute on other people's animations. That doesn't, like other people are wanting to use our workflows to execute on the things that they want to do. That's not part of our platform, but we
Sure.
could pursue that if we wanted to. So, I guess my question is like, are you exclusively focused on revenue in I guess you're focused on revenue in terms of like what's on our roadmap and what we would want to execute against, right?
Yeah, and I think about it this way, right? So from an operational objective, right? You're either I don't know, so I don't know how you're funding the business currently, right? But like essentially you're trying to build a business that's going to generate it's either got to generate revenue or you got to position your business in a place to get funding in order for you to be able to finance the existence of the company, correct?
Mhm. Sure.
So, uh, again, whatever your conditions are, right? Whatever your financing conditions are currently, maybe you have enough where you're self-funding it and bootstrapping it for 6 months, right? And you don't need to prioritize revenue right now. Like you need
Yes, that's where we are. We don't need to prioritize fundraising, but I mean, I it's always a good thing to think about revenue. So I'm not pushing back against you at all. I'm just trying to understand your focus.
Yeah,
So yeah,
so it depends upon your focus ultimately. And
sure.
that so it depends on where you are operationally. Like if you don't have a need to generate revenue in the next 6 months, right? And you want to deliver on this core like product value for this specific audience and you need to drive that point home to validate the thesis of the product, then that's what you focus on. But then there is a path to realizing revenue from that along the way, right?
Yes.
And it's not just like you don't need to be distracted on just capturing things that you can capture revenue now, unless again, look, I'm running out of runway in a month. We're not there. We need 6 months, right? In
Mm-hmm.
order for us to get to the former. And
Mm-hmm.
then it would be like, we need to prioritize revenue, right? So that's where it ends up. Each use case is going to be different.
Yes. Okay. That makes a lot of sense. I still think it's what you're saying is right. Ultimately you're trying to build towards revenue or towards fundraising because the company doesn't exist if not. So I don't disagree with you. I'm just trying to understand the goal of the call. So that makes a lot of sense. I can focus on number three,
Yes.
which I think was the MVP content. So making sure that that's in place so that then we can run the A/B testing that we want to do, and then we can set up the content creators ideally after that. So yeah.
Correct.
I
Which is
get your point.
Yeah. So identifying what that is, because then the next week would be, all right, let's get this to 100%, and then potentially also add into there, look, you have a list of 25. What percentage of the 25 could you strike a dialogue where they're going to be able to A/B test it for you?
I think they all are open to it, but again, we'd need to
Yeah.
schedule
So
all of that.
again, right, so
Yeah,
25 you've engaged with, but it's never 100%. So,
sure, of course.
so what percentage of that actually is going to commit to that?
Yes, that
Right.
makes sense. Maybe reaching out to them this week actually would be good. So that's a good point. Yeah.
Sure. Cool.
Okay. Thank you.
Yep. Justin W.
Yeah, hey Chris, and like Lisa, I also was not in the
Yep.
call last week, but up to speed on where we are. So that goal that you see in there is from the founder
Yep.
Joe.
Yep. So we'll just start as if like week two is brand new.
Yep. So what I'm really focused on right now is trying to land customers, right? That's the broad. How I'm doing this is I've developed a campaign targeting certain personas within my ICP. It's not exactly a spray and pray, but we're not seeing effective lead to MQL conversion, and I'm trying to figure out how to make that more effective. I've done A/B testing with both the body and also the subject and figured out what works well, but still struggling. So right now, moving through the campaign, I want to cold call 100 leads next week. This week I want to start 100 leads into the campaign. The beginning of the campaign, which starts with LinkedIn, then it goes to email, and then it's another email, then it's a cold call. And then next week is cold calling the 100 leads. But would love your advice on how to make things more effective. I did watch your video, the Stay Scrappy um,
Yep.
kind of interview thing, and like I'm pretty much doing all the things that you recommended.
So you already
But
create like ICP matrix.
I built an ICP and I built personas under that ICP. I'm not sure what the ICP matrix is.
And then you have proposed messaging for each ICP and the value that you guys are delivering, social proof to leverage for each particular ICP. Because when
I
people
did
are,
build out yeah, I built out the pain points, their key objectives, for each of the personas within our ICP. I haven't done the kind of proof points though yet.
okay. So when you're saying like starting a campaign, for example, like I'm not going to be surprised if you end up with zero. Um, I tend to want to do things manually and similar to I would say, with Takeshi, which is like, look, do whatever it takes to get to one meeting. This can just be creating a lot of noise to get to zero, right?
Yeah.
We don't, and it seems like as of right now, that's been the biggest struggle is that you're doing a lot of things that's creating a lot of noise, but it's not getting you the result or the outcome.
Yep.
So I focus on let's do whatever it takes to get to the outcome that's not scalable, and and then we can figure out how to scale it as a multiple based on the thing that got us to the outcome.
Got it. So yeah, instead of just like continuing to do this and throwing it throwing at
Yeah,
the
because it
wall.
is, and I understand why a lot of founders do this. You know, the only founders I've found that have been able to set up automations out the gate are the ones that are multiple time founders that have already learned this like, what I mean, like have already learned and gone through the reps to understand how to leverage automation in the most powerful way. But like otherwise, if you've never been able to prove that in some manual format that you're able to generate an outcome, then you're just doing that at a multiple, right? So you're just doing that at 100 times for no outcome,
Okay.
right? Does that make sense?
Yeah, it totally makes sense. And
Oh,
there's go ahead.
to me, it would be like focusing on doing whatever it takes to get to one meet. Like between now and next Monday, like what do you need to do to get to one meeting with your target ICP?
Okay. Yeah, and there's something that we're gonna try. It's Bordy. I don't know if you know about Bordy, but it's like a WhatsApp
Yeah.
AI. Yeah, okay.
Again, these are all automation tools that again, I don't know. Like if you told me, hey, I sent out 20 messages on WhatsApp, this is the language I use to get to two meetings, then I'd be like, all right, let's focus on WhatsApp. But we don't even that's still like hypothesis. We don't know if that's going to be a viable channel. We don't even know the language, right? And I'd rather much send out like hyper personalized. I spent 15 minutes researching a lead, and then I hit them up through LinkedIn, and I hit them up through uh, cold call and text message. Um, None of that worked for the first five, but then I tried this thing for the next five, and I got to the respond back. And out of the two, this is why I said the first one didn't respond back to what I said this first time, but then the second one did. It's as convoluted as that in the very beginning, but then when you get to the one that did, we can go and reverse engineer the steps that got you there. But right now, you're trying to automate all these different things that we don't know actually will work.
Yep. Okay. That makes sense. I'll try
So
different. Yeah.
versus I'm just gonna put the goal of get to one meeting booked with your target ICP. So that means they have to be a qualified sales lead.
Hmm.
Okay. So that doesn't mean just getting to one meeting booked. You can have five meetings booked, but if it's not with the target ICP, it won't count.
Okay.
All right. And then next week, I'm going to go through how you got there and
That
then
sounds good.
suggestions of like how to scale it up.
And then just one kind of uh just thing. I can't update row 14. If you could give me permissions, that'd be great.
Okay.
Huh. Could you also give my personal email? I'll read it off to you right now.
Yeah.
JTOMWAT@gmail.com. Cool. That should do the trick. Thank you.
Yep. All right. Cool. Jason G.
All right. Happy Opus 4.5 for those Claude users out there. good for productivity this week.
Yep.
So row, blah, 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 looks like 13 there. So I pasted in live links to some of the mocks we discussed last week
Yeah.
and took out just some administrative business items to make sure I was done before end of year, more for tax, so around the accounting side, tax, cap table, and so on. And then coming up on this upcoming week, focus on wrapping up four more of the UI flows, which, and then if you click in there, I'll explain why to really understand for me the cost versus effort around live avatars versus voice only.
Okay.
But if you scroll down a little bit, those are going to be the
Got it. Okay.
yeah. So those are the five different UI flows that I'm testing.
Okay.
So like live practice, go ahead and click that one. That's the one I just uploaded before we got on the call. Hit voice mode.
Got it.
So this is just getting now live interactive sessions with users around, all right, how important would video be, for example? Here's how this looks.
Okay. Okay, cool. All right. And what is this week's goal? Mock UI.
So to continue those, also on the production side, I need to get a landing page in place for which I'll use the mocks to
Yep.
create that, because that unlocks the GCP credits on my end. And then I have a back-end stretch goal of utilizing the feedback from the mocks around video versus voice. I need to do a quick on the machine learning engineering side of what's going to be a cost differential.
How are you going to get the feedback?
I've already had I had three calls last week. I have three more this upcoming week. Just
Okay.
some closer, more advisors. So these aren't like paying users necessarily at this point. It's just that early iteration.
Okay, so it's okay. So then ideally after next week, week 3, for example, we can start talking to the end users.
That's the goal.
Oh, perfect. Okay, cool. Let's focus on getting that done. So we can move on to week 3 of starting to talk to the end users and then getting a product out there. All right, Jag. Okay. Is Jag here?
Yeah, I'm here. Can you all hear me?
Yep.
Yeah, so last week's target was to get at least 10 users for my medical bill negotiation service, and I got only 3. So I posted a video on TikTok. I didn't get a chance to explore other channels. So this week I'm gonna one of my friends, she's a influencer with a big following. She's offered to do a post on Instagram, so I'm working with her to get the messaging. So that's the target for this week, and I've reduced the number of users to 5, the target for this week. But yeah, that's where I am. It's so people have downloaded my app, but but they haven't really used it. Only 3 have actually reached out and sent me their bills to negotiate.
Okay, so I guess so the goal is getting to 10 users, right? We told you like last week that it's not just about doing TikTok, but what did you do on TikTok that got to 3 users? Was there a budget associated, or was there a single video, or what did
Yeah, I
you
posted 2 videos on TikTok. There are no
is what?
promotions. It's just I posted 2 videos on TikTok myself. And that's it. That I got 3 users from that. I didn't promote it or anything.
Videos, you didn't add any spend to it, just
No,
two.
okay.
Okay.
Yeah, but I'm new to this, so I'll probably try the spend as well this week.
Yeah, so
So
the question would be, right, so like what we want to do is get, and I don't know what kind of these users are, right? So if you're saying these are 3 quality users or not, but
yeah.
we got traction with TikTok. I would then not spend any time right now on Instagram. Like, how can
Mhm.
you leverage TikTok to get to the initial goal of 10 users, right? Can you 3x or 4x the activity that you did on TikTok this week to get to the 10? Does that make sense? Because
Yeah, yeah.
your friend could spend time on Instagram and very well could outproduce you, like could get,
Mhm.
20 users, for example, or it could be 0, right? And
Yeah.
that's where we don't know. It's still, again, it's a new channel, it'll be a new, but if you got something that did work, right? The
Mm.
thinking is there's always validate it at scale, right? So can you 3x the amount of activity? Now that may be meaning you create 6 videos, or it could mean that you look at the you I don't know if you have analytics enabled on
Yeah.
TikTok, but you can be able to see like how many views it got, right? So
Yeah.
can you promote it or sponsor that video to 3 to 4x the number of views, and will it get you to the 10 users? But I would still focus on now this week would be how do I either create more content on TikTok and or spend to 3 to 4x the viewership to get to the 10 users.
Okay. Yeah.
So 3 to
Um,
4x is the multiple of
yeah.
like uh of the content and
Right.
or like 3 to 4x views by paid on TikTok to get to 10 users. Okay. And that way, if you know what that lever is, right, all of a
Right.
sudden you have a user acquisition cost that, again, we don't know what the proposed value is of these users yet, but at least you know how much it costs to acquire. And if you can know that, at least you have something that we can run ongoing while you explore new more cost effective channels potentially.
Yeah. That makes sense.
That way, if you have a goal of I need to get 100 users this week, you're not going to be like, I don't know how to do that. You just know I would have to spend X.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay,
Okay. Yeah. Sounds like a
cool.
good
Good
target.
job, though. Good job of getting the 3 users. I'm glad you stretched yourself to get the videos posted. I know that was something that you were uncomfortable doing, but let's see if you can double, triple or quadruple that. Ilya G,
Yeah, hi, how are you?
you're good?
Yeah, so basically the goal was to generate like 3 slides that yeah, deliver the immediate value. So yeah, I approached it a bit differently. So did some research and I discovered 2 key insights, basically trying to map the goals that I'm trying to, like the problems that I'm trying to solve and why people drop off along the way. And I came that, yeah, so the immediate value to customers would be showing suggestions and automation right away, starting from the right in the onboarding, not like separately onboarding and then they come to dashboard and it's half empty and, yeah, this is what I came up with basically.
Okay.
And yeah.
Um, so what are the key insights again?
Yeah, so basically the goal is to facilitate a continuous travel and automate multi-stop travel. And the second one is that the problem is that people drop off even
Yeah.
before onboarding. They sign up but drop off along the way. So there is definitely like a value for users, but it's not immediate, and it's kind of lost in the
Okay, you
along the
wanted
way.
to,
Yeah.
okay. Um,
Yeah, and for week 2, basically, now I'm seeing a spike in signups. So people basically see the website and I don't run any ads, don't really promote it. But
how are
people,
they
yeah,
finding you?
sorry.
How are they finding you?
I was exhibiting at Web Summit,
Okay.
made a lot of connections there. So I probably also maybe was featured somewhere, but I don't know exactly.
Okay, so the signups are not sustainable, right?
Yeah, probably. Yeah.
Going to fall off after
Yeah.
the novelty of the summit, correct? So, all right. I mean, to that point, it's like, how are you going to, like, you see a spike in signups.
Yeah.
Um, I mean, to me, fixing the initial flow, none of this tells me like, I mean, this is basically still the same thing as generate three slides that deliver the immediate value, right? So it's like, but you're now just putting it into the product. So how do you, how do you, um, how do you create like the onboarding that's going to deliver value? And I mean, again, you can either build it, uh,
Mhm.
because you're getting this, you got the signups now, but you're probably seeing like lack of engagement because you haven't solved for it, right? These
Yeah.
right? So you don't know what retention will look like or engagement will look like. It's probably going to be not the best because you are, yeah, you're dealing with the fact that it's not solved for. But like the point is, how do you retain these users to engage? And you can either build it out, which maybe you have the data and visibility to do that, or you go back to the faster version, which is just create three slides, or generate some screens in, Gemini or Lovable or Cursor, right? And like do it without having to fully flesh out the onboarding UI UX on the product itself fully. And you can do that faster and then just get people into that to start refining it before you finalize the code for deployment. So to me, it's better to create something rudimentary, get people to look at it and see if that actually fixes it. Because it is pretty easy to do that now versus trying to set it up in the product.
You mean kind of redirecting them when they sign up to see those slides uh, instead of going to
No, it means like reaching out to them through email to walking them through in a meeting.
and showing those slides?
Yeah.
And you
It's
okay.
like anybody that is a UI UX designer. That's what a good UI UX designer is doing. That is part of their job, right? They're doing usability studies as part of their research,
Yeah.
right? So it's doing that exercise. You get what I'm saying though, right? It's easier for you to
Yeah.
it's faster for you to get the feedback by creating the most minimal version of the design for then the user to review to let you know if you're on the right track or not on the right track versus it is building a fleshed out onboarding workflow that you're just deploying and you're seeing how people react, right? Which every single time you got to get new traffic and then you got to do it again and again and again in the elongated workflow to ultimately optimize it versus just getting real-time conversation feedback.
Okay. So yeah, so it would be better to basically reach out to those recent signups, right?
Yeah,
And show me.
I would try to get meetings with them and then show them what your proposed way is of doing all these things, right? So like how you propose
Mhm.
and fix the initial flow, how you proposing explore how to speed up development, iterative approach, how you proposing to design or structure a new onboarding and use flow, put that in front of them and see how they respond.
Okay. It could be just like basically a casual call with my keynote with those three slides, right?
Yeah,
Okay.
but that way you know what you actually have to build. Versus right now you're building your hypothesize, you're guessing essentially of what you think is going to fix it. Do you get what I'm saying?
Yeah.
And you're going to put it out, you're going to spend the time to develop it, then you're going to have to deploy it, and then you're going to have to see how they react, right? Or
Yeah.
not react. And you may be back again, didn't do it, and we're back to square one, gotta do it again. And then again, versus just asking them.
All right. Yeah. Makes sense.
Okay. So to me, like it would be again going back to generating three slides, like how it doesn't matter the
hmm
number of slides, but how are you proposing to fix this problem, right? That you discovered in the two key insights. And minimal version of that so that people can understand it. And then I would be like, this week would be creating that minimal version of solving for what you discovered as two key insights, right? And then getting that in front of real users on a live call. And I would say,
But Mhm.
yeah,
But I guess it could be just like, yeah, a mock-up or like just keynote
exactly.
without
Yeah.
interactivity.
No, doesn't
Like,
have to be.
okay.
Okay. You just need to solve for this. You need to validate if this is real. Or do
Yeah.
they not understand what the hell you're offering?
Yeah. Makes sense.
You know? Okay. So it goes back to that. I like there's and I get this is sometimes uncomfortable for people, which is like getting on a call with your customer or your user, like and like and it's not this polished thing, right? But
Mhm.
it's you're you're just you're delaying an inevitable outcome and you're spending extra resources, either time or money, to you know to do something that again, you don't know how the market's going to react, right? So you either going to spend a ton of time where
Yeah.
small percentage chances you nail it on the head, but larger percentage chances that you're still way off base. So you're gonna, and then you have to go through that again, right? So you're trying to generate this whole polished thing that again, you're trying to just for your own ego essentially to put it out there that just may or may not resonate. And the percentages are actually stacked against you that's actually going to resonate. So,
Yeah, got it.
okay,
Yeah, to be honest, I'm highly technical, so it's yeah a bit new for me.
I get it.
Yeah,
Yeah.
thanks.
So cool. Uh, all right. Emily K. Okay. I'll try checking in again. Christopher N.
I'm here. Hey, Chris.
Good. Hey.
Hey, so last week, you kind of talked me into doing the ICPs, dividing the VC scouts and SMB, and figuring out what their pain points were from like 1 to 5. So I put like 5 pain points for each for VCs and for scouts. Try to figure out what their biggest pain point is because I'm not sure if that is their biggest pain point. So I just threw that on there. Really try. I know it's like a little general for the ISP. Like VC scouts are typically operators or like builders or ex-founders. Maybe I can go a little bit deeper into that, but just trying to generally figure out who these VC scouts are, and then same for the SMB brokers.
Okay. Um, okay, got it. So I mean, okay. So I would say let's pick one. Because each of these, like when you can figure out the exercise to go through one side, you're going to be able to figure out the other side too. So I
Got
would
it.
say, yeah, choose one for you to work on next week. So not both, but just
Okay.
choose one. One is going to be creating the leads list, which I think is not that difficult, but let me know if you run
Hmm.
into blockers. Because
Hmm.
PC lists, I mean, that's pretty straightforward. You can just
Yep.
create a trial on Crunchbase and you're going to be able to pretty much get access to everything. But I would do that. So creating the lead list, that should be straightforward. But then I would force yourself to create a Google form of like
Okay.
qualification form because it will force you to figure out how to word this in a way that's going to get you the insights that you need to know how they scale it. Right. So like you're saying due diligence is fragmented and time consuming, right? So like how would you ask this? Would you just ask it generally as like on a scale of 1 to 5, right? Uh how much of a pain is due diligence for you, right? Or are you going to position it where it's like due diligence is a pain because of choose all that apply, right? Frag
I see.
I'm saying so it's going to force you to start figuring out like, okay, well, what do I really need to know here? Uh, right. And maybe you want to leave it so open-ended, right? Which is like, you know, on a scale of 1 to 5, 4 or 5 being the greatest pain possible, what are like the top things that you're dealing with? And then have these be an option. I don't know the best way, but like
Sure.
force you to start thinking in that way.
Okay, makes sense. Because initially I was gonna put out book 3 calls, like informational interviews, but then I started to realize that it got a little messy because
Yes,
it's just like
because
you're
you
just
have a
just randomly finding people on LinkedIn. It's like that's not the right point. The point is to be strategic
yes, and then this way you can actually quantify the data
and
back.
quantify it exactly.
So like whether you're actually going to send them the form or you're just running through the form and filling it out yourself, right? At least at that point, it's going to be quantifiable versus you're just having like, open-ended conversation, which you
Yeah.
bullet points, which is then you end up with a bunch of anecdotal feedback, which is a great starting point, but it's going to be it's going to be a lot more difficult to quantify.
Got it. And I guess for the next step here is I don't want to jump the gun, but with this information in hand, I don't want to build a product necessarily, but I have a background in like sales operations. So there's ways that you can kind of, I wouldn't say weaponize, but be able to create more systems and flows to generate whatever it is, X, Y, and Z. But that's kind of like my thinking process is like figuring out what their pain points are and then just trying to help them out through that process. But
Yeah,
that's
that
what I'm
makes yeah.
cool. Thank you, Chris.
All right. Kathleen T.
Yep. So last week I booked three calls. Some with they're like API ICPs and the other one is a 3PL.
Mhm.
As of this week, one of the API ICPs rescheduled to next week, so therefore I only have two calls this week. And my goal for next week, it feels impossible, but that's what it's supposed to feel like, is somehow book three calls with my ICP one, which is like 3PL operators who use our billing software. And why it feels impossible is because, and I'm not making excuses, I'm just saying what I feel, is number one is like peak season. So they're all fulfilling for Black Friday, Christmas orders and things like that. So they're really busy. So I mean, what I've been doing, I've been, adding them on LinkedIn, sending DMs through their accounts on Instagram and LinkedIn and just trying to make a connection. But, I'm getting acceptance, like people are accepting requests, but, no reply to
Yeah.
my greeting
How did
message.
you get the two meetings or these two calls or the three calls?
Hmm. Yeah, it was all through LinkedIn.
Okay. So what I would do
Mhm.
is how many LinkedIn requests did you have to send to get to the three?
40.
40. Are
Mhm.
you on Sales Navigator or no?
No, I'm
Yeah.
not.
So I mean, if you can, I would, this goes for everybody, but you can apply to Microsoft Startup Program, which
Uh,
does give you a trial on
Oh,
LinkedIn Sales Nav. So
okay,
this is for everybody, but try to apply to this.
okay.
Uh, So yeah, and this will give you like I think like a either a 1 or 3 month trial on LinkedIn Sales Nav. But LinkedIn, the reason why I'm saying that is because LinkedIn Sales Nav gives you a bump up from 40 to 100. So
Okay.
yeah, so it'll allow you to at least like double the effort. And if you do that, my thinking would just then, if you just focused on LinkedIn between now and next Monday, and you did the exact same thing but double it from 40 to 80, can you get four or six?
Okay. Yeah. And I love that mentality. And I'm gonna execute on it. It's just, is there any messaging I could do to get them there? Because like I said, right now for my ICP, it's peak season, so they're really busy. They're fulfilling orders and it's a rush. And I mean, with anyone who's super busy, the last thing they want to be sold. But I mean, billing is a pressing problem, like especially if they need to close their books this year. So I've experimented with an offer saying like, hey, I have a, kind of like an entry point, like you could have this
Well,
one-time
I guess
service.
like yeah, to me like whatever you said to get the two book calls through LinkedIn.
Okay. All right.
Like don't reinvent the wheel for something that already works. If you come back next week and be like, I did the exact same thing with the exact same language and I doubled it, but I got zero, then we can say it's something else, right? But
Okay. That's
until we
fair.
do that, we can't say definitively. Or you might come back and be like, look, I got 10. You know, uh, what we want to do is either validate or disprove that this is either a fluke or it's like legitimately a scalable version.
Okay. Sounds good. Thank you.
Cassie C.
Hey, so glad to be here. Thanks, Chris. Yeah, so last week my goal was to reach out to 5 strategic angels. I did that and I actually got my app is in the executive leadership coaching space. So I've got a warm intro to Jerry Colonna and he's scheduling time with me hopefully in the next week or two, which is super exciting. So I've got a number of really like high profile people that I'm talking to. For context, I am pre-product, but 80% done with my MVP. It came out of a vibe coding boot camp. I'm coding it myself. It's a multi-sided platform. And I've got about 10 coaches on my wait list. I've demoed it to a guy who coached the LinkedIn C-suite for 5 years. And he was like, this is beautiful, really interesting angle in terms of the way that I'm approaching it. So I've been jumping in forward into like, let me figure out fundraising and figuring everything out there. But my goal is to really get my product complete. And that's been my Achilles heel. So I'm like a product exec. I've been in product for 20 years. Like I know how to, so I'm leaning more into like the GME stuff of like, okay, let me do demos, have conversations, talk to investors. And I'm not finding enough time that I'm carving out because I am still in this bootstrap, like solo building situation of just getting my build in place. So I need to get more structure around my roadmap. I have access to an offshore team through some other work that I've been doing, and I just need to figure out how to activate that. And my objective timeline would be December. I'm dog fooding my app with a coach I have lined up to just iron out bugs. January, I can start activating on the wait list. And then February, I have a coach that's ready to use my app for the launch of her book. And she's a Corn Fairy coach. So Corn Fairy like coaches, Google people and stuff.
Okay. Okay. Yeah, I mean, as a product person, I'm sure you already hear this, but it's just more of like, how do you do this in a more shorter, faster iterative loops, which, I mean, like, um, which is more aligned with like I think like the startup speed versus like, working at a larger organization on the product side of things where you have maybe the luxury of more time to kind of get certain things done or an elongated process to get things done. So I would just make sure as you are building, right, like each step of the way, you'll know what kind of like the pivotal moments are of the product. But I think like making sure that you get that real-time feedback so that you don't end up too far into the product where you haven't checked in with the end user enough that it starts derailing um, from the core mission or the core vision of what you're looking to
For
solve.
sure.
Yeah.
Right. So I don't want to, I want to keep it really potent in terms of the impact and
That,
delight of the features that
that,
I'm building.
yeah.
My issue that I'll need help with is like uh pricing. So I'm really still trying to figure out the pricing piece, especially in a multi-sided platform and in a context where sometimes individuals pay for coaching and organizations pay for coaching, if that makes sense. So there's like for me, there's a structural question around pricing strategy that I need to iron out. There's a part of me that wants to like go orthogonal to how other companies have done that and be more of like a Stripe. So like I'm creating the platform where I'm getting a percentage of revenue and just versus a lot of coaching companies focus on basically reselling coach hours and driving margin. So I'm thinking through the strategy of that. So like that's a big Achilles heel for me that I want to that would then help me refine and like really get crystal clear about that MVP. And then the other thing is just getting really narrow on my ICP. Like there's a couple of angles that we could go there, and I'm still like I've done 20 to 30 discovery interviews with coaches of different kinds. But I'm like it's weird to be parallel pathing like that broad level of discovery, also talking to investors and also building. It's just like it's a lot to navigate, if that makes sense.
So I mean, again, like I think you have to prioritize what's important first, right? So um, it's fine to have those investors in the loop, but I think you still need to, again, it's going to make you that much more confident to be able to go back out and be like, hey, this is what I built. It's only 10% of what I want to do, but I have a wait list of 100 people.
Yeah.
So how do you get to there?
How do I get to my wait list of 100? Yeah.
Yeah, right. So whatever that means, right? So like I think again, continuously validating as you're going along, and then just making sure that you are delivering something of real value and that people are willing to waitlist for this or LOI it for when it does come live and whenever, if it's January or February.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, my biggest issue is people that see it are like 9 out of 10 say I've really identified an interesting problem and a unique way to address it. So that feels good, but the pricing hasn't been a part of the wait
That's
list.
fine. Yes, I
So
understand.
I need
Yeah,
to figure that out.
yeah. So I mean, I would say, um, yeah, I mean, I would say by like week three, what we want to do is also like a competitor matrix, right? So that would be kind of identifying what you're producing. And then I know that you're in a space that probably is offering this in a unique way that hasn't traditionally been offered, which is fine. So you're going to have to probably look for service-based businesses in conjunction with like a software play. But like, how can you look at uh, both types of competitors and then map
Yeah.
out what you're offering? And then, I know service is going to typically charge a lot more, but like, then that will help kind of figure out like how you want to potentially price this out.
Oh yeah. I mean, my second slide of my deck is a competitor positioning slide.
Okay.
So we can, I don't know if that
So,
makes sense to talk about
yeah.
that too. Oh,
Make
great.
sure you add into there also like how they price it though, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay.
Okay. Thank you, Chris.
Cool. Caroline M.
Hi.
Oh,
So I found out on Friday that my co-founder wants out. I met with her today and she definitely wants out. So I'm
yep.
solo now. Last week's assignment was to validate the Evite feature for our product. And I ran a survey, online survey, and got 53 results. And I validated the original question, which is I think I defined the Evite as clean summary text with all the details, who's bringing what, time, place, etc., with all the links. And there was a strong need. I mean, 86% said that, oh no, I'm sorry, 66% said that it was a valuable feature. Where I got a little bit stuck. Then I asked the pricing question, and not a lot of people are willing to pay for this feature or even the expanded PIPA suite of features. And that has always been, we've always wrestled with this idea, with the question of like, will people pay for this? But I know that people pay for things like Doodle, and it's like I think the base price is 6.99, 6.95 per month. And it's not even that, I don't know. I I've never liked it. I don't know people, I don't really know anyone that really loves it. So I feel like there's an opportunity. I'm just struggling to figure out the next step at this point.
Yeah. So I guess there are two things. So one, can you continue to build a product without a co-founder?
I'm sorry.
You continue to build this as a solo founder, or do you need a co-founder?
I'm willing to go at it alone. I liked having the a co-founder because she was also partially technical, and so it was nice to have somebody to bounce ideas with. But right now, I do feel comfortable moving forward by myself.
Okay. So then, so you don't, you're, so I guess my question basically becomes is like you need to make a decision if you're going to do it by yourself or you need a co-founder. Like if
Right.
certain instances, if you're not technical, then that's going to be a critical component of it. But if it's if you're already technical and you can build out this product, right, and that's not the blocker,
Yeah.
and you necessarily need a co-founder, then yeah, you can decide to go at it alone. But it's entirely up to you.
Yeah. So I have been building. I've
Okay.
been the primary builder, and I have a technical advisor, like a casual, like unofficial technical advisor that I could, reach out to when I get stuck.
Got it. But I guess again, question becomes, do you feel confident of going at this alone? It's a lot hard. It's perhaps a more deeply personal question because it is a lot harder and it depends on like how much are you convinced around the thesis around what it is that you're solving, right? So, um, I would,
The,
yeah, need to, I think about that and decide. But maybe that's
yeah,
your long assignment, right? It's like there's no
I
point in going all through all of this, right? Research, and then it seems like the research hasn't come back in a favorable way, specifically as it relates to, the pain point you're solving for if people are willing to pay for it. And so there's got to perhaps be, it may be the way that you're messaging it or the way that you're describing it, right? That maybe isn't necessarily hitting home yet, which is going to take some time. And so I wouldn't necessarily continue to focus on building until you know what that looks like, right? Um, but go ahead.
Well, so because it is a new, it's a new way of delivering this type of service. People currently, um, people are used to apps, but I don't know of any service that does it via, uses text, your native text app as a channel, to deliver the service. So I kind of feel like people, I'm sure everybody says this, but I feel like they need to see it before they can understand how it can benefit them. And I feel like I feel a little nervous about exposing myself in this way, but um, I would be happy if it solved, I would be happy to build it to solve my own problem. So I do feel pretty passionate about it, and I guess at the end of the day, I am comfortable going at it alone. If I need somebody along the way, I'll figure that out. At this step, I do feel
Okay.
comfortable
If
moving
that's the case,
forward.
then this is what I would do. I would then don't stop building the product first, but like you got 53 responses. Like out of that, how many of them can you get into a call with you
Um,
between now and next week?
oh, between now and next week. Good question. It's
What's a good
Thanksgiving
stretch
week.
goal?
Maybe
Five?
six?
All right, let's say five, okay?
Okay, five.
Five book meetings from the responses.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and maybe you can look at how they answered it. Maybe it seems like they're leaning towards the understanding the value, but then the pricing is just off, but maybe they need to see something. And since you can, like, and then I would just build again like 3 slides, and it could just be text based. It doesn't have to be great, but like again, there's so many tools now that you can use to just create 3 super powerful slides, right? But like deliver what it is that you're trying to deliver, and then
Mm,
then basically get the answers like, why wouldn't you pay, right?
yeah.
If that becomes the point, and you gotta do it in a non-standoffish way, which is like, look, I'm just trying to see if there's a viable business here. Like, I'm not gonna ask you to pay or not pay, but the whole point is like, what, and maybe it's starting to ask them about like, how do you use these other apps? Why do you pay for those other apps, right? Like, um, and trying to get a better understanding of like, what are you doing or not doing, uh, from that standpoint to get them, sometimes it's not even about like the value you're providing, but just again, like the way that the paywall is set up, right? And so like trying to better understand the psychology around how they're engaging with other similar tools, uh, but in a way that they're willing to pay for them.
Okay, yeah, it's gonna be a little bit tricky to follow up because I actually made it completely anonymous. Um, but I can reach out to the people that I know that I shared with and yeah, get on their
Or you
calendar.
try to run another one where you get 53 and then you collect their email,
Yeah, yeah, I guess I could do that.
right?
Okay,
Cool.
thank you.
Yep. Busolo, Busola.
Hey Chris, how you doing?
Good.
I appreciate it. Thank you so much. So last week, I did mention last week that I was trying to build a wait list on our landing page. And the advice you gave me was that rather than just collect random emails, it makes better sense to
Yeah, yeah,
actually
yeah.
come up with a list of questions and ideal answers so that our leads can be qualified. So I've gone ahead and done that. So there should be a link there that goes to the questions.
Okay, got
Yes,
it.
the first one is the questions,
Okay,
and
cool.
then the second one is on a Google
Got it.
Sheet is the
Perfect.
ideal answers. Yes.
So build a list of MSPs and then we're gonna try to figure out how to get them to fill it out. Or you're gonna,
Oh,
right? So, or the next step would be how do you get them into a phone call so you can fill it out for them?
okay. So by MSPs, you mean like banks, credit unions, and
Whoever your target ICP is.
mortgage lenders? Yeah. Now, would you advise that I reach out to them by email find a contact and reach out to them by email?
So right now, your goal is to figure out how you can get as much contact data from that specific ICP as possible and where from. So
Oh,
as much contact
how do
data,
you mean?
email, LinkedIn, phone, like direct. These are different channels. Other social media URLs. That's what you're trying to figure out.
So, yeah, I'm sorry. I'm sorry. Can you just explain that again? Am I trying to get information on our target ICP or the potential MSPs?
Who is your target ICP?
ICP.
Who is your target ideal customer profile?
Millennials and Gen Z renting in Los Angeles and Southern California.
Okay, so when you say MSPs, what are you referring to?
Oh, I didn't actually write that. I don't know who wrote that.
Okay,
Yeah, I don't know yeah, I don't know who wrote that. I didn't actually do that.
so
So
do
my task, what I actually wrote was that I was going to try to embed the questions on the landing page.
okay.
So yeah, I saw that had changed. I'm not sure who wrote that.
I think that was probably Bodhi. Okay.
Yeah. But having said that, I think it makes sense to try and reach out to the
Yeah, I think before you embed any questions on the landing page, I think you need to create a list of your target, or like not even create a list, but how are you planning to drive traffic to the forums from your target customers?
Okay, because they're millennials and Gen Z, I think TikTok and Instagram. Again, videos and
So then I think your goal is to create the content. So your goal is to this week would be create the content to use on these channels.
yeah, correct. Yes.
Okay.
Now, in your opinion, again, do you think there are better ways to drive traffic other than TikTok and Instagram?
I mean, those are fairly inexpensive ways to drive
Yeah,
traffic. The quality of the traffic is a different story.
yeah,
But again, like in this context, it might make the most sense.
yeah, yeah. That's what I thought.
But again, let's test it, right? Like you might be like yeah, you might be like Jag, which was able to figure out TikTok and got 3 users from it. So,
Yeah,
maybe that's what it is.
yeah,
But right now you got to create the content that you're going to use across TikTok or IG or IG.
yes.
And then that would be the immediate goal. If you have time to post them up, I would do that to see if you're going to able to generate traffic from it at all. But
Okay.
first step is create it.
Yeah, I'll go ahead and do that.
Okay.
I appreciate you. Thank you.
Yep. Bodhi had a hop. Alex M. Okay. Sarah.
Hi, thank you so much, Chris. This whole process can seem very, very lonely, so it's really good to have you and everyone. Do you need to go over what I had last week? Because I didn't manage to stay on, or do you want me to just jump in?
Let's just jump in for this week.
Okay, so basically we've been sort of focused on the accelerators and fundraising. So we've gone down that route. The entirety of the MVP is full stack founder built, end-to-end monetization. Everything has been tested this last week and the week before that. One of the things that I am sort of trying to create momentum on is like meeting. I've managed to meet a lot of people like yourself and made great sort of progress in the network section. About a couple of weeks ago, we went to the second round of meeting with Pair VC. That was a very fruitful conversation. They love the product, they love the idea. It just kind of felt like they were looking for traction. And for us, that fundraising would have meant that we would kind of, finance our go-to market process. So we were having discussions again. I managed to talk to them again. but they ended up saying once you show us a bit more traction, we still want to hear updates from you guys, and we'll potentially move you to the seed round as opposed to pre-seed. And they were very lovely about it. I don't know if that's the formality and the language. Then the second was we had a meeting with Headline. They're more sort of focused on the consumer marketplace aspect of it. So they wanted either 250,000 plus revenue. This was through a direct contact that I had. This wasn't actual accelerator. This was a different one. They wanted 250,000 users or an annual revenue of 1 million above, none of which we had. But again, he said, I'd very much love to stay in touch. And do you guys have an update list for your investors? At which point he then sent me a list of other VCs who are sort of more in the pre-seed and early stage consumer marketplace, which then he also said that he said, I will make those connections for you, which was great. But then it did make me think about our deck, which was the original version of the product, and there's been very different renditions of it. And it's not that the product has changed, it's just that I, as one of the co-founders, the other co-founder is very much tech-oriented. It's very hands-off-ish, great with technical features, but not very good with getting involved with the rest of it. So I'm kind of contemplating whether I should focus on optimizing the deck to highlight the features that essentially would be I'm seeing investors respond to more, like the tech mode and everything. And so I wanted to do that. The second aspect of it was the second bottleneck that I'm personally finding is how do we substitute traction if we don't have it? I have almost about 313 people, active verified users in the pipeline who I've had personal interviews with, but my co-founder is worried about how I can scale that. And then so I was contemplating using my own followership and essentially creating an Instagram campaign to get more people. But that's been something that I'm very much I mean, even though that's been my job, I didn't want to do that at this stage. The third one, and one part of the reason I wanted to do that is to kind of show the investors that we're very much out there with the product. Then I think that's about it, really,
Okay. Um,
until I maybe forgot something.
that's fine. So, I mean, basically my takeaway is this, which is fundraising is a lot like the sales and go-to-market process, and you're
Yeah,
gonna get a lot of people that will be like, "Oh yeah, that's cool," and then you moment you ask them to
100%.
something, they're gonna just ghost you, or there's
Hmm.
nothing gonna happen, right? Or they're gonna be a friendly decline. Uh, so there's two ways to go about this. One, you can try to refine the deck to cover up the fact that you don't have traction, which is ultimately a big pain for it's going to be a topic of conversation and it's going to set you up for an uphill battle
Yeah.
uh, for a lot of these investor conversations, especially now where the threshold for um, some kind of like AI driven PLG motion and like it's became a much more uh, the threshold for investment is a lot higher because
Hmm.
the ability to build more of these PLG motions that can get to 3 million in annual revenue in 6 months or a year, right? And
Hmm.
so it's almost become like, you know, there's no excuse for not getting to that if you're trying to go and raise, right? So, uh,
Yeah, to be honest. Oh,
yeah,
go ahead, Chris. Sorry. To be honest, the thing that I was worried about getting into fundraising was because we had done such a good job at creating the MVP and essentially bootstrapping the entirety of the product. I was like, well, they're going to basically say, why don't you go and come back with traction? You've done all of this on your own. Getting the users to come on board should be the easiest thing in terms of, financially speaking and time-wise. And so I've spoken to people from Beehive and Substack, and I heard from a lot of them, like you've said many times, to kind of do it manually, get on the phone with users, find out that whether what we're building is essentially responding to what they're needing as opposed to falling in love with our own solution. than not worrying about their problem. So I've been trying to do that. The only problem I'm facing right now is particularly with 72 of the influencers, creators who are really big with massive numbers. I didn't want to burn them. So I wanted to sort of give them the idea, give them what the solution is, and want them to come on the platform to use it, but I didn't want to use them as like lab rats. So I was a bit worried about losing them in the early stages of building the product to optimize features and everything. So that's part of what is making me hesitant to get on the phone or like have these calls and discovery calls and figure out whether these people are willing, because most of the people have said they were absolutely more than willing to. Essentially, the way our platform works is 15% direct cut from transactions, direct transactions that happen. There's no advertisement on the platform or anything. It's between, so creators create something, audiences subscribe, opt in, collab, buy something live midstream in the live stream. And so we take 15% of that. And most of them have been saying that, yes, they will. They're willing to share that revenue model with us. But obviously, it also depends on, as you said, there's a lot of promises and people, and most of these people I know personally. So they might be a little bit biased and want to give me good feedback, but I'm not so sure.
Yeah, I mean, so I think like you have to get out there and you're gonna have to get to you gotta get to the new creators on that you have no
Mhm.
relationship with.
Yeah.
You need to prove that you can scale this out beyond what you've already done.
Yeah.
To me, that's more important because you're basically going into these investor conversations with like a handicap.
Yeah. And that's literally what
And
they're, and they point out that.
it will continue to be that way until you figure this out. It doesn't. It's not a game of you're gonna be able to get meetings most likely.
Hmm.
It's not a game about meetings, right? And
Mm,
you're going in. It's like you're basically gonna be playing a game handicapped. Just keep that in.
sure.
That's the truth. So I would, for me, like instead of
Hmm.
suboptimally or like doing these meetings with a low efficacy, I would try to fix the handicap first.
100%. But in the meanwhile, do you recommend any type of strategy or anything that I can potentially say in the meanwhile, other than the fact that we have these verified high profile people in the pipeline? Is there anything else around that I can kind of, as we get meetings? Or do you think I should just kind of be like, this is what it is and I'm working on it?
Yeah, this is what it is. I'm working on it. And then to that point, you said you're hesitant to leverage your own, immediate personal profile for doing ads and then driving you. I mean,
If
why?
you think it's the only way, I'll do it. Yeah, I mean,
Well,
that's one of
you
the
have
things
to.
I would ask him.
I mean, at this point, like there should be no differentiator between who you are as the founder of this business and the business.
Hmm. Okay, I got you.
Like it needs to be you're tied to it, and so either if you don't have enough faith in what you guys are doing to self-promote, right? Like
Yeah,
then it's not going to be a great indication when somebody goes on your profiles as an investor and be like, why the hell there's no, I mean, there's no association to the business.
100%. Like if I'm getting in the business of content creation, I should be
Yeah.
able to do that and create
Yes.
content for the right.
Yeah.
And I think that's better leverage for me if I want to get users to
Yeah.
kind of come and try it.
I think
Okay.
it has to be, and I think you have to figure out what that is sooner
Hmm.
or later. I mean, you could literally do that to me, that would be what you do between now and next week is like
Oh, wow.
leverage your own personal profile to then scale up a campaign to get a new list of potential creators.
I got you. Can I do the planning first and then potentially get in touch with people? Or do you think I should just roll the dice, get on? Because
Uh,
most of what, okay.
there's no,
It's just
again,
the
like,
work that I did before was a little bit different. So I was in filmmaking and human rights work. So now it's going to be a bit of a slap in everyone's.
is it though? I mean, again, like, it's all how you position it. I mean,
Yeah.
it's storytelling. How do you tell the
Yeah.
story that gets people to understand what you're trying to do?
Okay. Okay. I can do it just slowly and organically and not really take it all the way to the product, but just kind of propose the problem, I guess.
Maybe,
Yeah.
or
Okay.
you wear as a badge, like this is part of what you're a founder now. Like,
Okay.
And
All
this
right.
is what I do.
All right. Okay.
And
Thank you so much.
yeah, so I mean, I would push you to at least like post at least one piece of content
Okay.
between now and next week that promotes the startup and the fact that you're a founder on the product.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Drive
Uh,
a CTA, meaning like adding a link
mm-hmm.
as a means to collect signups somehow.
Okay. All right. Oh, okay. That's
You
cool.
know, you could do that, like you literally could be posting a story with a link in the story to a
Mm-hmm.
form that this is what you're doing, and have them submit something that's intent.
Okay. Okay. In the meanwhile, do you think I should get in touch with people, like high-end expert creators that I'm trying to, those are my ICP people. Should I get in touch with them in the
No,
meanwhile
because
as well?
you're saying right now you don't want to burn through those, right? So why you don't need to keep on accumulating something that you can't do anything with really right now, right?
Mm-hmm.
So let's go after the ones again. Like you need to start stretching it to go after the cold outreach of people that may, again, this is not necessarily even cold outreach, but like you're just promoting the fact to see if you can get through 7 degrees of separation people that you aren't as familiar with to buy
Mm-hmm.
the idea.
I see. Okay. And that could be potentially part of the validation process as well.
Yes.
Okay. Thank you so much.
Yep. Cool. Anybody else that I missed that is still here? I think everybody's good. Thanks for sticking around. I'll send you guys all the updates. I'll send you a few things between now and next Monday. Kind of keep you guys motivated, but enjoy your Thanksgiving, enjoy time with family. Uh, yeah, I think it still fascinates me this experiment. Somehow it's like there's people who still have excuses, people who still miss for whatever reason that I know that they could be here. So, but I'm glad you guys made it all the way through. And yeah, keep asking questions. Message me in the WhatsApp group if you have any blockers. That's the point, is to leverage me so you don't have any excuse by the time next week rolls around. All right, thanks, guys.
Thanks, Chris.
Yep.
Thanks.
Thank you.